There it is.
This is Charles Arthur, and you are watching the Break It Down Show.
This is interesting, man. I love your new book. We're going to talk about this at quite a long length there. But I used to have a show called the Break It Down. This is the Break It Down Show. I used to have a show called Popping the Bubble, and I covered a lot of technology, and I got to know a lot about the technology ecosphere, as everybody, or ecosystems, everybody likes to call it, and everything. And it's just fascinating to talk to someone who has been doing this for as long as you have. I was looking at your website, which, look, you don't do a lot of maintaining on it. Who cares? We're here to talk about that. But you used to publish your predictions.
Oh, yes.
2005, 2004, and where we're going. And you quit doing that. And I can kind of understand why, but do you still have a mindset for predicting the technological future like you did and kind of taking a stab at that? Or is that idea totally dead for you?
Well, one of the things that happened was that I looked at the predictions I used to make, and yeah, you're right. I used to do them annually. And then I used to tot up how well I'd done annually. But what I realized is that the whole technological prediction cycle, at least, and sort of looking at what things are happening, what things are not happening, there's no reason to do it annually. It's rather like, why is New Year's Day on New Year's Day? We're sort of going around the sun and we just happen to be at a particular point. But the whole idea became one of actually you should just synthesize this into everything that you do. Whenever you're looking at technology, whenever a company is rising or a company is sort of perhaps stuttering or looking around for what to do, then that's the point where actually it's ripe for a prediction. So in that sense, I try to just do it all the time. I try to get a sort of gestalt view of what things are changing, how are our lives being affected by this. You can do the small things of, is this company going to be up or down at the end of this coming year? But I more generally try to get more of a feel of what's the social effect going to be, because I think that's always the important thing. I mean, companies come and go, but social effects tend to be much deeper and much more longer lasting, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. And you've written, look, we're going to talk about your social warming book here in a second. This is ultimately the reason why you're on, but I think it's important to do some background, because as someone who understands, I mean, would you call yourself a futurist, I guess, as a person with a pin in it? And if you're not a futurist, I mean, you're almost compelled to look at the market. I mean, you were the editor for the Guardian's technology section. That means you're looking at what's ahead all the time. So are you a futurist, or what is your role, do you think, in all of this?
No, I don't think of myself as a futurist. I mean, futurists, I always think of, they're sort of people who are saying, in 10 years time, we'll be doing this. And some people are really good at it and some people are terrible at it. So no, I don't think of myself as a futurist, because I generally find that when I try to do that sort of stuff, I just get it very badly wrong. I'm always too skeptical about what's going to happen. So the things that come along in 5 years, I'm like, well, I didn't really expect that to happen. I tend to be on the skeptical side. So no, I mean, I'm a journalist. I try to be an analytical journalist. I try to ask questions. I try to get past hype about stuff. And you're right. Yes, I was the editor of the Guardian's technology section. It was a sort of a pull-out section for a while. That was from 2005 until 2014. And actually, especially when it was in the printed form, which it was for the first 5 years, I always tried to to be thinking, okay, what is it going to be like in 6 months from now? And my question was always, to try to find a feature for that week that would be on the front of the section that would be, in effect, would still be true in 6 months. And people would have read it now and said, oh yeah, I read about this 6 months ago. And now this is happening. I really understand it all. I've got this good grounding from that. So I tried to be a short-term futurist. Is that a thing? Much more like that.
I think that's a good thing. The other thing about being a sort of a quasi-futurist is, when I think about these things, I try to think whatever I think is possible is impossible to understand. Like my future self will look, my current self can't see what my future self will see. So I always try to take whatever I think is going to happen and I just shove it way further out there, because who cares if you're wrong? You're taking a stab at something we can't know. I mean, 2000 to now, 2021 we would never have guessed this. We would have guessed that a robot would help us develop an mRNA sequenced vaccine that would largely solve our problems And yet we would hate it so much that a lot of us, massive percentages of us, would not even take this answer. So they have this robot that can go beep, here is the answer. And then we would give out the answer and people would be like, I don't like that. Like we would never predict that.
That's true. Though, I mean, it's interesting you choose 2000. I mean, yeah, if you think about it, the end of what people thought the world would be like at the end of 2000 and how it actually was at the end of 2001 are pretty much as different as what people thought, the world was looking like at the end of 2019 and how it looked like at the end of 2020. And those are big things which, was technology a big part of that? I'm not so sure. I mean, it went along for the ride, but in between 2000 and 2001, you have the 9/11 attacks, and in between 2019, 2020, you have COVID. So these things can come out of nowhere, and trying to be a futurist in that respect, you would have been completely flummoxed by that.
You've written very recently on Medium, and I'll put your Medium link on here in a second, but you've written in Medium about the future of EVs and how countries, especially the UK, are trying to go completely UV or EV. I know here in America, we're talking about it and we're acting like we want to do it, but let's be honest, we're a little schizophrenic. So we'll change our mind tomorrow and not do it. But this means significant changes in what's possible. And I know my neighbor, and I want to have his company on the show soon. They're one of the companies that's working on the carbon, let's say the fuel cell problem. So they have hydrogen fuel stations that will basically park at an existing gas station. You would buy your franchise, and then you would be able to bring your fuel cell car up, fuel it, and then drive off, which, I mean, if we times that by 10,000, at some point, we've got enough of these fueling stations to provision fuel cell cars indefinitely, and so this is a reality. Again, not a reality 10 years ago. We were trying to figure out how to even get people to accept driving a fuel cell car. So when you look at EVs and where we're going, what do you see? I mean, you've done so much of this for so long. A lot of the EV fight is over, but there's also still a lot left to do. So what do you see?
With EVs, the problem is always the pricing signals. How do you price stuff? That actually drives a lot of consumer behavior. It drives business behavior. It often drives business behavior before it drives consumers, because businesses look at this stuff in cold hard cash and they say, okay, this is more expensive to run, this is cheaper to run, so we'll do that. Whereas consumers tend to be, I just really like this car. And it's really hard to persuade people that the EV costs you 1/3 per mile to run that the petrol one does. So with EVs, it's all about how you create the incentives, and I think the US hasn't quite grasped the fact that it has to make the incentives for driving EVs big, but it also has to make the disincentives for driving petrol cars big. You've got to have a fuel tax that actually makes people think, whoa, maybe actually these EVs are a good idea, because electricity is cheap. It's with solar panels, it's basically free. So for example, I was on Twitter recently. I was talking to someone who was telling me that in France it costs something like 39,000 euros, which is about the equivalent in dollars to register a new car. And I said, okay, so does that mean the second-hand car market is incredibly busy? He says, actually, no, people hang on to their cars for a long time, but then you've got strict pollution limits, so you can't have a polluting car. So, people have to make careful choices. And France is a pretty big country. So with EVs, it's not about, is the technology ready? The technology has actually been ready for ages. It's about, is the way that you price things going to make people change their buying decisions, change their behavior? And that's actually the thing that's really hard to do, really, really hard to do, because taxing fuel is politically unpopular. Any politician who does that, then the next time there's an election, which will be in a couple of years, because it always seems to be in a couple of years in the US, their opponent will say, well, I'm going to reduce taxes on fuel, and everyone will go, yay, it's going to be, everything's cheaper. But the trouble is that that's short-term thinking. It's not thinking about, well, what's actually best for the planet. I'm reading a book at the moment called The Ministry for the Future by Kim Scott Robinson, which is looking at, what happens to the planet when things start to go bad. And he sets it about sort of 2025 onwards. And it starts out with a gigantic heat wave in India, which kills 200 million people. But he said recently in an article, he said, actually, a lot of these things are happening sooner. And he points to the Pacific Northwest heat wave. And he says, if stuff like that keeps on happening, then, you could get calamities. So, yeah, this is a very long-winded way of answering your EV question. But, the thing is, you've got to make all these changes in order to forestall the really bad future where, you'll be happy if you can drive anywhere.
I swear we're going to talk about your new book in a second, but I think all of this stuff, it all blends into this, right? Because, so one of the problems with EVs is that, at least in this country, people are absolute diehard multi-generational Ford families, or, look, I'm not going to do that. And then the one kid is a Chevy kid, and then that's it. There is no other option for vehicles. And then you're like, but the Ford, and I'm picking Ford, whatever. But the Ford EV is simply, it's not a Tesla, which is, one of the best cars ever made, right? So we have this problem. That's one thing. And that kind of goes to the social media part of this and affect, and how do you create affect? But what do you think about, so I had a guy on the show who's also a technology guy, and he was talking about the pollution from like the top 20 shipping ships that bring things from fill in the blank country, like is exponentially bigger than anything that we as humans can do ourselves with our cars. Like it's nothing. And these things take off from port all the time. And are they going to do tri-bred or quad-bred technology to get it's all in moving the load. Once they get the load moving, it's somewhat manageable. And then the viable, I've had Dr. Stephen Running on, who's a climatologist. He won the Nobel Peace Prize the year that Al Gore did. And I ask him these questions all the time, like, how much carbon can we have in the air? Like we say, global climate change. Yeah, but what does that mean? He's like, how about 400 parts per million? If we can manage that, we can process that. Let's continue to use less coal. Let's get to no coal. And he gives realistic things. And I'm like, what about the full cost, the full like cradle to grave cost of an EV versus, petrochemical powered vehicles? And he's like, we just don't know the answer to this. And it could be that they are even, and it could be that we're surprised that if we continue to put efficiency into petrochemical powered cars, that they outperform the battery powered cars. So what are your thoughts on these like bigger, more strategic questions?
So the thing about, a petrol-powered car is always going to be burning fossil fuels. It's always going to be putting carbon in the atmosphere, and there's no doubt about it. Whereas an EV, pretty much the same sort of components as a petrol car, except you can, in theory, fuel it, so to speak, with energy that you just get from solar cells or wind or hydro or any of those sorts of purely renewables. And in the UK, for example, roughly 2/3 of our electricity comes from renewables or nuclear, and that number is going up all the time. So it's difficult. The thing that you said about the shipping, the ships and the pollution from them, it sort of gets to be the sort of the politics of despair, which is like, nothing we can do is going to make any difference. But actually, things you do can make a difference, because as much as anything, we'll sort of come on to this. It creates the feeling that, hey, look, we're all together doing this, and to some extent, what climate activism needs is a tribalism. I was saying this on Twitter the other day, that what you actually need to motivate people is for them to feel, hey, I belong to this group, and this group has an important thing to do, and we should make people feel that they want to be part of this group doing this thing. And so in that respect, if you are sort of saying, okay, I'm going to switch to an EV, I'm going to do less carbon intensive things, I'm going to fly less, or if I do fly, then I'm going to make sure that, for example, trees and stuff are planted, then you get towards the point where you're building a group who are all thinking about the same thing. And that sort of tribalism is actually really important for human survival. It's how humans have survived. And again, we'll sort of get onto this later in terms of how the social aspect works. But tribalism was actually a key motivating force for people.
And tribalism is oftentimes a corrupting force, right? Like all of these things are a balancing act, right? We have to be careful of isms, and activists are great until they're not. And all of these things cause problems. And my buddy Dickie here is talking about the viability of batteries. And you and I both know that when you get a certain critical mass behind an idea, the leading, or sometimes called bleeding edge of technology, is pushed further forward faster. So yeah, battery technology of today. So again, when I had this I learned so much from this technology show. I had a guy on, and he's like, never bet against software engineers, because they will spider web and change everything about what they're, and it will constantly improve upon the improvements. And so you can never bet against these guys. So battery technology, just hang on 10 minutes. It's already just got better while we were talking, you know?
Well, yeah, that's true. And also sometimes, there's very simple things. There's a program on here in the UK called 39 Ways to Save the Planet. And today they were talking about, a scheme which is simply you take a big concrete block, and when you've got spare electricity, you just move the block up to the top of a tower. And when you need to discharge the energy, you let the block move down, and that drives a motor, and that generates electricity. And that's for all the times when your solar power, when it's dark, your solar power's not working or the wind's not blowing, that's fine. You just use the battery technology. And again, and there's other things. I mean, I think it's enormously regrettable that nuclear power has been neglected for decades. If the building of that had continued in the 1990s, if people hadn't got sort of crazily overreacted to things, then actually, you'd be in a much better position now. France, for example, has a very large, I think it's something like 80% of the electricity comes from nuclear. They're sitting pretty in that regard. They're doing really well. Nuclear has been a terribly neglected thing, and it's partly because the Greens had an agenda against it, because they said, well, the waste really lasts a long time, but the trouble is that climate change actually that lasts quite a long time as well, and it's much more immediate.
Yeah, and I think he says nuclear is viable, but we're idiots in the U.S. It's so true. And the technology to employ nuclear has gotten a lot better. And if there is a energy miracle, and it's not petrochemicals, which it is, the problem being the waste, the next thing in line is nuclear. It's incredible that we have this powerful resource that can do it all. All right, but you're not here to talk about that, and I appreciate you indulging that, because I think at a lot of times we have these conversations, we can't even have the conversation because of the social warming, as you put it. Your book is called Social Warming: The Dangerous and Polarizing Effects of Social Media. Well, let's talk about this, because we're going through, again, here in the U.S. and probably partly in the U.K. as well. We're talking about Afghanistan, and if you're on one side of the political pile, you think that Joe Biden is an idiot. If you're on the other side, you think that Joe Biden is great. And we're not getting along very good. And we're not even talking about the right things, because we're more worried about not getting along.
Yeah, it's tricky. It's one of those things where I mean, Afghanistan is getting to be what in the book I call a scissor statement, which is actually a phrase I borrowed from a guy called Scott Alexander. A scissor statement is a phrase or a few words that when you say them, they divide people into two camps. You can either be on the one side or the other. You cannot sort of take a middle ground. It's really hard to. It's been quite interesting this past year, watching the scissor statement sort of grow on social media, which is critical race theory. You say that phrase and everyone knows which side they're on of it. They know if they're for it or against it. They may not know what the hell it is, but they have a very clear view that it's bad or it's good, and standing completely outside that, because it means we're just not affected, I guess, by it here in the UK. It's not a part of any curriculum or anything like that. It's been really interesting watching that develop, and the way that these things flow through social media and divide people. Afghanistan is getting the same sort of way, and I'm sure there'll be some sort of phrase that'll grow up out of this whole situation that will be used to divide people in the same way. There'll be something to do with the Marines who died the other day, or the airlift, or the decision, something like that. Something will come up out of that, and it'll be a bit like I guess Benghazi used to be. Benghazi is a sort of polarizing thing for many Americans, in terms of they think it's a bad thing, or they think it's a good thing, or a thing that is overblown, or whatever the phrase would be. So yes, the social media has this enormous potential to divide people.
Social media also attempts to predict what I like. YouTube always wants to predict what video it is, and a lot of companies do this. What song do I want to listen to next? What item do I want to buy on Amazon? And it's just not very accurate because they use big data. Like where I'm from in California, it's the Bay Area, and baseball is a big thing there for a lot of people. And for a long, long time, it was like, we love the A's, we love the Giants, whichever one's doing better is the one we all jump on the bandwagon and we follow the hell out of those teams. But somehow we got to the point where it's like, no, you're either or. It's all binary. And I think this is where a lot of these social media problems happen, is where things are either or. There's no elegance. There's a lack of subtlety. Everything's just, you're either for Benghazi or against Benghazi. And now you're picking, I'm for it. I'm for Benghazi. But it's like, it's insane.
It's really interesting. So, I mean, let me sort of describe. So social warming is a phrase that I came up with to sort of describe what I could see happening on social media. I've been on Twitter for absolutely ages, perhaps too long. I was on Facebook very early, and what I noticed was that over time I saw that people just seemed to get a bit more angry with each other, and they seemed to be a bit more annoyed, and there was more polarization, and there were sort of various events that happened down the years which seemed to really show a colossal amount of people being angry with each other, and just the what you'd call the social temperature was just higher. It's like when you sort of walk into a bar and sometimes you think, oh, this place, I'm getting a strange feeling about this place. Right. It's just that's the sort of the social temperature. You just feel things are just ready to kick off. And there's what I sort of see is that there's this 4-step process. So first of all, there's the fact that humans are tribal. We like to divide into tribes. It is a survival characteristic. We went through a phase when there were not many humans on the planet. And so being in the tribe was essential to your survival. And if you did things that were bad for the survival of the tribe, then you triggered outrage. And the outrage on the part of the tribe would get you kicked out of the tribe. If you're in the out group, you're basically at risk of dying. So it's important that you signal outrage at people who you think are breaking the rules, which also means that you're cemented more tightly into the tribe, and also that you eject people, and that you're disparaging of people who you think should be in the out group. Secondly, this outrage thing, which then when you get onto social networks, outrage can be about any sort of thing. It can be, about, well, I think that, it's bad that people should be vaccinated before they can go into, this Broadway show or something. Not very important, perhaps, in the scheme of things, but, people get outraged about it. The third thing that happens is that you have algorithms on these social networks, which are all looking for, well, what sort of things are people engaging with? And because of our tribal nature, we find outrage is engaging. It attracts our attention. We tend to amplify it, or we tend to disparage it if we disagree with it because we're in the other tribe. So the algorithms interpret all this activity around outrage as, quote, engagement. They say, hey, people are pretty interested in this stuff. And so they try to show you more of it, because algorithms are just tuned to, well, what we're trying to do here as algorithms is we're trying to make people stay on our social network for longer. The longer they spend here, the more time they're with us, the less time they're with anyone else, the more adverts we can show them, the more money we make. So, for the algorithms, outrage-driven engagement is great. And the fourth part of this process is about moderation. Is that social networks are pretty lazy about moderation, or they're very indifferent about it, because moderation is difficult. Moderation takes humans to do it well and to do it accurately, and also moderation tends to mean that you're going to have you're going to be dampening down the engagement. And if you dampen down the engagement, people might say, well, this place is pretty boring, I'm going to go somewhere else. So you have this 4-stage thing. You have the tribalism, the outrage, the algorithms, and the moderation, or the lack of it. And that process is what gives you social warming, and it just keeps on driving, keeps on going. And that's the process that I'm describing in the book.
How do we put some water into our nuclear social queue? I mean, to take the analogy of the nuclear reactor, but how do we cool people off? I mean, it's infectious. I've built some pretty good. Look, we're both probably roughly the same age. We remember, like, when we first learned we could text in the middle of the night, and we're like, I'm drunk, I'm going to text this girl. We started drunk texting and sending pictures of penises and boobs and all that stuff. And you're like, wait a second, that's not how people act. And then you learn to moderate yourself. Are we going to be able to moderate this? I mean, it's designed to, look, there's a lot of people, but Tristan, I can't remember his last name, but Tristan talks about like, we're designing this stuff to make this dopamine hit come, and we're getting you addicted to it. I'm desperate to get pissed off about Afghanistan. I've got every right to, not my president, all these things. Are we going to be able to cool this down, or is this warming going to keep on happening until it turns into some kind of significant conflict?
Yes, Tristan Harris is the guy you're thinking about. Thinking about it. So the idea of a moderator, rather like putting water in the nuclear reactor is interesting. I mean, the thing that does is it absorbs neutrons. It slows stuff down. I mean, I use the allegory or the analogy of social warming, the metaphor of social warming, because I think it is one of these things where you think, well, the little thing I'm doing, that's not going to make much difference. It's everyone else, they're the problem. And actually, it's all of us. We're all the problem. And I think that you have to start, the first step is actually just recognizing it. It's recognizing the outrage. It's recognizing your own tribalism and your own desire for outrage. We do this stuff of being outraged because it sort of makes us feel good. It makes us and it identifies our tribe for us. They see the thing, and if they agree with us, then they say, yeah, right on, Pete. You tell them. And so you have to recognize these impulses in yourself. And I mean, I spend days on Twitter, and I sort of look at things and I go, oh, look, there's an outrage tweet. Oh yeah, there's another outrage tweet. I mean, today I went on Twitter and I opened it up and someone was there talking about something about an organization had withdrawn sponsorship from something or other, and they were outraged and they did this long, incredibly angry thread. And I looked at it and I thought, yeah, but you don't actually know why they took the money away, do you? You haven't actually looked at why it is. You just sort of assumed all these things. I thought, this is just pure outrage for the sake of it, to sort of rally your troops. It's not going to make any difference to the organization because you haven't asked them. It's just purely performative. So you have to, if you recognize this stuff, then you can start to make a difference. You can do it at the personal level. Rather like I said, about EVs. It's recognizing when these things are happening and not letting the algorithms take over and drive you in this way. And I think that's actually the biggest way that you can start to make a difference is by resisting these impulses. Try to get beyond the tribal. We're not quite at the sort of stage where there's only 30,000 or whatever humans on the planet. It's actually sort of less important. It's possible that for Afghanistan that Joe Biden was left with a crummy hand and he played it about as best he could. That's one possibility. And people who say otherwise, maybe they're right as well. History is one of these things where it takes a long time to come clear, and often the desire to write history on day 2 of whatever event has happened is so strong, but also so wrong. That's what we have to get past.
Yeah, and maybe Joe Biden played the hand as best he could, and that's just not good enough. Like, he's just not capable, right? Like, there's all these different things that can be the truth. I sort of look at a lot of the social media companies as paint stores, and then like I've met these guys, I've talked to them. They want better things, whether they're egalitarians or they're freedom loving people, whatever it is, they want the right things to happen. And then, for example, ISIS finds out that, hey, we can rally a lot of people around the world and we'll get any, look, you're always trying to exploit people who are exploitable. Well, here we go. We got a bunch of people who are ready to be in a rage, and you can literally recruit someone you've never met, never interacted with, and then bam, you've got this operator who's in whatever city doing whatever thing you want to advance your political means. It's incredible. But that paint store, they're like, hey, we're the paint store. Okay, well, we'll limit ISIS, but we're not going to limit this. We're not going to limit that. This one guy here will limit. It doesn't seem to be an effective strategy. I mean, we want freedom, but we can't handle it. We really struggle with it.
It's difficult. I mean, the thing is for the social media companies, and I include YouTube in that because they've had a big role in this. The social media, like I say, it's the very first line of the book. Nobody meant for this to happen.
Right.
They wanted it all to be great. They wanted everyone to be really friendly with each other. Mark Zuckerberg was sure that if only Israel and Palestine could be on Facebook, then they could, everyone would be friends, and that would solve the Middle East crisis. Turns out it's not quite that simple. So the complexities get beyond them as well. So there was a stage, for example, when Facebook and to some extent this is still true. Facebook has algorithms which try to get people to join groups. It says, hey, you've got these interests and these interests, you've got, sort of live in this sort of area. You could, why don't you join this group? But it also has an algorithm which says, hey, you guys look like terrorists. You seem to be ISIS, or you seem to be Daesh, or you seem to be the one in Africa, Al-Shabaab. So actually, we think you should be kicked off Facebook. And what happened is that the algorithm for saying, hey, you should be in a group, worked to find all the people who look like terrorists and sort of put them into groups and said, hey, you people, why don't you all join? And then the algorithm that was looking for people who seemed to be terrorists and who it didn't like and kicking them off said, oh, no, we're going to, you should be off. But it turned out the one for finding people and putting them to groups was much better at the job than the one that was meant to find terrorists and kick them off. So, Facebook started to have a bit of a terrorist problem, and they began to acknowledge this in sort of, 2016 onwards. But that's the difficulty that you have here. If you go in thinking it's all going to be fine and that people are generally nice, then you're going to be pretty upset when you discover that some people are really fundamentally not nice and that they're going to exploit your network. And yeah, it was really interesting, as you say, when ISIS started exploiting YouTube and putting sort of sermons and stuff on there, YouTube was a bit taken aback. Especially by the fact that people would find that they'd be recommended these things. People who are into Islamic scholarship, who would sort of take them further and further down this rabbit hole until they'd end up on sort of, the bottom level with ISIS. And that became a problem. You couldn't quite say that they've been radicalized by YouTube, but you could sort of say, yeah, but this has given you a pretty good escalator downwards. And acknowledging those problems would to some extent mean acknowledging a fundamental difficulty with social networks, which is that they can bring out the best in people, but they can also bring out the worst. And if you're trying to stop the worst things happening, then you have to really keep a tight handle on it. And that's the moderation step, which is where they're really bad at the job. So, a guy called Donny O'Sullivan, who's a correspondent for CNBC, pointed out the other day, he said, isn't it weird that the Taliban are on Twitter, yet Donald Trump was banned from it? Yeah. And there's not any good answer to that, to be honest.
There is not. Oh my God. Yeah. Well, because, when you declare that you are the purveyor of all things holy and right and correct, like just as an example, and I'm going to hit YouTube right on the head here because, well, they deserve it. They're more concerned about what I describe my genitalia as and then whose genitalia I desire than they are about my success. Mm-hmm. They'll limit the monetization of a show because it's politically uncomfortable for them, and they don't have someone qualified to even listen to this thing. So, and like this show might be demonetized, whatever. I have no control over that. What a terrible business partner. And then all I'm trying to do is have reasonable conversations. But if I'm not in some kind of out group, or if I don't project that, then I'm somehow. Like, that's not how you moderate things. That's not how you build community. That's how you build disunity. Mm-hmm. I would say, at least
it's a very blunt sort of blunt way of doing it. It's very everything looks like a nail, and we've got a great hammer here.
Yeah. We want to be inclusive. Be included. You're like, gosh, I kind of don't feel included right now. In the social media sphere too. Let's pick on Twitter for a second. Me and Twitter, we broke up. Okay. I have an active I made a joke. I made a joke, Charles, and it wasn't even initially a bad joke or good joke, but they said I incited violence, which is absolutely preposterous because one, it's a joke. Two, it's about people that have been dead for 170 years, right? So at some point we have to get a hold of ourselves. So and my appeal is hung up in appeal heaven. It's not gone anywhere in months, right? And I'm fine with it. Again, we broke up. We're good with that. But this is the other thing is like you can't be the moderator of people and try to improve things if you're this monolithic structure with no doors at the bottom. Like if I knew someone at Twitter, if I cared to reach out and get to know someone, maybe then they would consider my case and they'd say, oh, sorry, our mistake, right? But they're not inclined to do that. They don't list phone numbers. When you call people, you don't get through. And so you have this very dumb organization that is purposefully avoiding the engagement, the negative engagement it creates through its flawed techniques and approaches.
The huge difficulty, though, is that it cleaves to the whole Silicon Valley model of how are you going to make money, which
Yeah.
is you start off small with a few people, and you throw a whole lot of servers at it, and you get big still with a few people. And that's the model for how to get rich, basically, in Silicon Valley. And with social networks, it was a really hot time from sort of 2004 to about 2010 or so. And the whole model of have a few people, stick a lot of servers in, don't worry about it much beyond that. That worked really well for him. And then, of course, once you get to the stage that Twitter's at, where you've got 300 million people using it around the world, then it gets quite difficult doing the customer service. I mean, you get the same if you had a problem. You could be hanging on for Google for a long time trying to get them to answer your query. They've only got 1 billion users of Gmail, so if you've got a problem with Gmail, could be you're cool as valuable to us. You're number 1,575,000 in the queue. It's difficult, but that is why they then rely on algorithms, and then the algorithms go a bit screwy because the algorithms are fighting each other because one's cleaning up and one is making a mess, and the outcome is that you get the social warming effect. You get the difficulty where it's just no one seems to quite be in control of it, and it all seems to be running away, and that's the runaway effect that I think worries us, that concerns us.
Yeah.
And in the book, I do suggest that one way to control it, which isn't sort of available in global warming, but is for, at least for the social networks, is you mandate that they have to be no bigger than a certain size. You say no bigger than 250 million. For Facebook, that would cover the US and Canada pretty handily. If they want to be in Europe as well, they've got to set up a completely separate company, which doesn't you can't befriend across the Atlantic or whatever, and you have a strict one in, one out sort of policy. So if someone deletes their account, then fine, someone else gets to join, and you do it like that. Because the problem that you see with Facebook, particularly because of its size, 2 billion, 3 billion, whatever it is this week, is that as with all social networks, the problems as the social network grows arithmetically in size, the problems that you have grow geometrically. So if you imagine that you had a group of 100 people, so you have a certain number of interactions, but when you get up to 200 people, then suddenly the number of interactions has increased by fourfold. You've doubled it, but they can all interact with each other, and you get more complex interactions. And that's even if you're just doing one-to-one. If you get one-to-many interactions, then things just start to go mad. So your moderation problem has grown so much more quickly than the social network has grown, but none of them actually, react to this. They don't say, okay, we've really got to scale up our moderation, because they're all thinking about the bottom line, about making more money and not hiring moderators. So the difficulties that you get, quite besides the natural problems that you have with any sort of social network, those problems scale up and they start to get out of hand really fast.
Yeah. One of the things too that we've seen that's a problem, and I don't mind being square on this because these companies need to figure this out, but Patreon is like the home of podcasters and musicians and artists of all kinds. And I've for a long time been very hard on them, because ultimately what they do is they take everybody's audience to their market and they say, hey, we are able to gather an audience. We'd like to monetize this. And someone says, yeah, here's $40 million. Here's a round of funding. Go out and continue to improve and do these things. But that takes and puts a barrier between me and my audience. You're going to promote what gets you audience. And so if it's a podcast, like the top 20 podcasts on Patreon, they make some pretty decent money. You look at it and you're like, actually 20 is about as good as they can do, but then they'll change the rules and they'll say, oh, hold on, new rules. This happened just for OnlyFans just this week. Like, hey, no more porn. And everybody's like, hey, by the way, this is how we all make our money. Like, oh, never mind. Yeah. And so we have all these things where someone is trying to be my business partner, but they don't act like a business partner. They act like a dick who wants to control things and make decisions for me and my audience that I build. What gives these social media companies the right to do that and to think that that's okay? I mean, Apple is a terrible business partner for a podcaster. They don't provide effective ways to monetize. I promise they monetize. They don't give you any feedback. They don't interact in a way that makes sense like a partner. So what gives them the right to do that? And how do they get off doing that? That's, I guess, my question.
What gives them the right to do that? I'm not sure anything gives them the right. It's more, if you want to, if you want to play the game, this is my ball sort of thing, isn't it? I mean, there is Patreon, but like you said, there's OnlyFans, there's other places where you can monetize. There's sort of Substack. I mean, Spotify lets people monetize podcasts. I'm not sure Apple actually does make any money out of podcasts. I mean, I think actually that they've recently introduced the subscription thing, but it's pretty difficult to make it work, and people have been sort of tinkering with it like it's a sort of real vintage car going, I don't know where this pod goes, I'm not sure how this fits together. So I don't know. I mean, they maintain the big open directory of podcasts, but they actually do that for free. There's no price to that, even to the other companies that use it. So I think they make the money from everyone using Apple Podcasts, so they're listening to it on iPhones and iPads and stuff. Right. That's how they make their money, through, as it always has been, through selling the products. But yeah, I mean, the difficulty with these things is always, who gives them the right? It's sort of, it's like, well, they provided you the field on which to play the game. So if they say you can't be on the field, then that's sort of tough noogie, isn't it? So you can either go and sort of create your own field somewhere else and see how many players you can get on, or else you got to sort of suck it up.
I know Parler was just about killed, and maybe probably are still like a zombie of a company, but who's doing this right? Like, who is doing the social media thing where you're like, this is ahead of the curve?
That is a really good question. I mean, which companies sort of don't do social warming? I mean, I think LinkedIn actually doesn't seem to have any effects like that I've really noticed. Instagram would be interesting. Instagram would almost fit this, except that Instagram, because you can't retweet stuff on Instagram, you can't amplify it yourself on Instagram, but it does do algorithmic amplification. And the trouble with that is that you can, you get young girls, for example, who start looking at sort of suicidal thought stuff, and that all gets amplified back to them. And that really reinforces it. So they're not doing it right. They sort of went through a period when they were doing it right, but they've sort of gone away from that. They've gone away from doing it well. So in terms of who's doing it well, who's doing it right, it may be that it's almost sort of not a social network at all, that it's some little forum somewhere, because those still exist, little specialist forums dotted around the net. They don't have algorithmic things which say, hey, you should really be looking at this. They're just sort of like lists of here are posts that people have put up, do you want to post on it? I mean, in that sense, Reddit, I've never thought of Reddit as a social network, but Reddit sort of does that. It doesn't amplify stuff. It just says, here's a subject. Are you interested? Do you want to contribute? Do you just want to lurk? It's always when the algorithm gets involved, that's when the trouble really starts. Mm-hmm. Although, you don't have to have an algorithm for things to go badly wrong. In the book I write about WhatsApp, there's no algorithmic work on WhatsApp. It's purely messaging between people. But the difficulty is that people can start to spread stuff that is rank untrue, and it will go viral, because the thing about untrue stuff is that it goes viral much more easily than true stuff. Mm-hmm. And the weird thing about this is that that's because untrue stuff can be tweaked so that it just fits into your little prejudices. It hits the little notes that the tribe wants to hear. Whereas the truth is often much more nuanced. You don't want to hear this sort of stuff like, well, Biden got a really difficult hand, but possibly they screwed up the thing, and they had bad intelligence about how fast the Taliban would be in Kabul. That's really, don't tell me stuff which disappoints me and makes me think that this person did a bad thing or this person did a good thing when I want to think they did a good or a bad thing. Don't upset my world. Give me the fake stuff, because that just fits into it much more neatly, and that's why that stuff goes viral. And on WhatsApp, it's there's example after example in India, in Brazil, in all sorts of countries where stuff on WhatsApp just creates more problems than you would ever expect.
Yeah, and you're right. We also have that craving for a meme length article, and then everything's packed in there for us, and it confirms whatever we're thinking. Whereas like a more nuanced conversation like this is not as palatable. Like the conversation before I had was on Afghanistan with the guy that helped plan the whole thing and understands the logistics because he's done it at the highest level. And he's like, understand all of these things, and you're like, damn it. All this forces me to rethink everything, because it turns out most people are trying their best, especially in a place like Afghanistan. Most people are trying their best to do what they think is the right thing in that moment. And thank goodness not a lot of other people have to do that in that environment because it's really hard. But a meme doesn't capture that. And a meme doesn't allow me to be mad at Joe Biden. Or, I mean, a nuanced conversation doesn't just revolve around Joe Biden. We have to do other things that force us to do it. Here's the thing that struck me. So I recently spent just about a month on the road in several different road trips, camping, that kind of thing. And as I drove around my big, beautiful country, I saw the wonders and the beauty that's out there. I mean, I don't know if you've been to the US, but it's a big, gigantic place. And there's so much natural beauty that we haven't managed to ruin yet. And it's wonderful to see that. And then the people you interact with. What I didn't see on the road is I didn't see COVID. I didn't see people worried about Joe Biden. I saw people being people, and by interacting with them in real time, my little social networking thing I did was completely enjoyable. I met so many wonderful people. I may never see them again. Maybe we connect on social media, but actual face-to-face social media, without an algorithm directing me with just me and my truck and who is this person at this gas station? Oh, it's marvelous. It was wonderful. I didn't see all the hate. I didn't see all the rancor. I didn't care what the person's political position was. I didn't assign them one upon looking at them. I talked to people. Is it possible to replicate that with a robot, with an algorithm?
I guess what you're really looking for there is a sort of serendipity algorithm, isn't it? It's the sort of the happy accident sort of thing, where you just pop in and you interact with someone. I mean, the difficulty is always that the internet scrapes away so many useful layers of our personal interaction. And that's another thing that, makes it so difficult on social networks. With Twitter, 280 characters. How much can you really get into there? I mean, even if you're just writing all the time, it's really difficult to get, your whole personality across. And anyway, you want to hold some things back. There are things about yourself that you just don't put on there. Yeah, same with Facebook. I mean, and you get people who you feel are just oversharing on Facebook. Are they sort of trying to give you all of themselves, or are they actually just sort of giving you too much? Those are the sorts of difficult things that happen. But yeah, it's so you only have to look at the way that the internet effectively destroys sarcasm. People have to sort of say, yeah, I'm just kidding, to see that it's, in that sense, it's quite a low bandwidth thing. Even though you might be doing it on video, it's very hard to read nuance. But when you're doing it in real life, then you get all you see all the subtle signals, all the body language, the way when you step out of your car, how someone looks at you, how they stand, all those little subtle things that you're not aware that you're actually responding to, and yet they're reading you, you're reading them. It's a very different thing from looking at 280 characters of text on a white background.
What if a technology company built their algorithmic robot and allowed us to tweak it? So I'm like, how about let's take wisdom and let's crank it to 12, because my wisdom dial goes to 12, and my petty bullshit thing goes back to 0, and this is how I want to dial it in, and then let me tune. Like YouTube will say, hey, how did we do with this suggestion? And I always say, you got it wrong. I don't care if they get it right. They got it wrong, because I'm just never happy with what they, recommend. Right. It's just so simple. It's like I watch something because it's quoted somewhere and I want to see the full quote. So I'll look up like President Trump's remarks, and I get everybody. I don't want everybody. I want just exactly what he said, or whoever it is. So what if we did that? What if we invented that robot where we could tweak certain characteristics and then find what truly would be a good algorithm for me?
So the difficulty with that is, I mean, just imagine the challenge of just trying to find music that people like.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, you imagine music. Music is, I mean, think of a two-dimensional graph, then think of having 3 dimensions. How many dimensions, how many axes do you need to describe music? And to sort of say where your galaxy of music that you like, where does it sit? Because there'll be, well, I say, I don't know, I really like the Doobie Brothers, but also there's this thing by Beethoven I really love. Like, how the hell is anything ever going to really be able to cope with that? And that's just your musical tastes, which are just to do with music. how are you going to do that with people? That gets really complicated, and that's to some extent is why we, in our friendship groups, we'll have people who actually we might not get on with if we were on social media with them. If we only saw them through social media, we might think they're a bit of a jerk or something. But actually, in your friendship group, they're great. You get on perfectly with them because they sort of dial back those elements that would be dickish online, and they dial up the things that make them attractive as people. So I think what you're describing is actually something where people get together in some sort of drinking establishment and have conversations. I think it's sort of slightly beyond the capacity of machines to do it. And would you really want a machine to be doing that? It sounds like you could actually have more enjoyable time in a drinking establishment.
Yeah. Well, and I think that there's something to be said for that. Where I just had a meeting with someone I respect, and we're always trying to figure out how to help my business along. And he was like, what if you just did 10 posts and 10 comments on other people's threads on Instagram? And I'm like, but I don't want to be on Instagram any more than like 5 minutes a day tops. And I just don't enjoy it. It might be a path for somebody, but I'm not a 19-year-old big boobed fitness model, So yeah, I think we have to be our own meter, right? Like we have to say, I've just spent too much. Like even when I was on Twitter, I wouldn't go into that toxic big river of the feed because it's just full of toxicity. And I'm like, ugh, it's gross. I would never go in there,
I got to say with Twitter, my recommendation to people is always don't use the Twitter app, get a third-party app. So there's one for the iPhone or iPad or the Mac called Tweetbot, which I think is really good. It just gives you the reverse algorithm of it. You don't see things like trending topics and stuff unless you go hunting for them. There's also one called Twitterific, which does the same sort of job. All that stuff about trending and moments and things. It's like you don't actually need that. Just give it the reverse chronological, because that's the sort of stuff you really want. You just want to know what's the latest thing that's happening. You don't want to have, you should look at this tweet. It's been, it happened while you're away. If it happened while you're away, well, that's tough. That's just missed. It's gone past in the river.
Yeah. And this, people often say like the 24-hour news cycle, that's precious. That was like 25 years ago. It's this instantaneous news cycle that's really, we're not built to withstand that much negative input, and to just get that much. And I often ask people, because I do this show, I get to talk to a lot of wonderful people, some comedians, some authors, some other, all these people. And what we always get to is like, how do we gather joy? It's easy to gather outrage. We talk about this for an hour, but like, when was the last time you were just like exploding, overwhelmed with joy? And then keep track of those moments and share those on the internet, or don't keep them for yourself. But we lose track of how to moderate our own behavior on these things, because we do get, this is the addiction side of it, right?
Yes, it very much is. It can be likened to, cigarettes and stuff like that. That it sort of feels good to do it. You get a bit of a hit. It sort of fills a little vacant part of your day. It's so these days it used to be that you'd see people outside offices and they'd be on cigarette breaks. Now you see them outside and they're sort of on smartphone breaks, and it's fulfilling the same function. It's just sort of an idle thing for your hands and your mind to do. But it's the sort of dopamine hit of outrage and sort of scrolling and pulling to see what new things come. You're almost always disappointed. You refresh the Twitter feed or whatever, or you refresh Facebook, and you're almost always finding there's not very much there. That's not too interesting. And it's just like being at a one-armed bandit. It's just like being in Vegas, pulling the slots and sort of hoping this time you're going to get something. Damn, it wasn't any good. Yeah. And that's that's the sort of behavior you have to be aware of. It's all this sort of self-awareness of what am I doing? Why am I sitting here and hoping that some great thing is going to happen? For me as a journalist, when I was a full-time journalist at The Guardian, Twitter was actually quite important. Because you were waiting for the next big thing. You were looking to see what stuff was happening. You were trying to contact people, and Twitter was a really good way. I go back so far. I go back to the time when people just had landlines, and the first time people got mobile phones, and you could actually track them down through their mobile phone number. That was revolutionary. But Twitter then sort of brought a whole new thing to it, which is, hey, you can catch these people by just addressing them on their handle. So there's the addictive behavior is again, it's something to be aware of, something to think to yourself, why am I doing? Is this the best use of my time that I actually have? And what else could I be doing with it?
Yeah. Just everybody, they can all keep track here. The book is called Social Warming: The Dangerous and Polarizing Effects of Social Media. And man, you know what I would even say is so this is a big thing that I learned while I was in combat zones was the affect always beats the effect. You know, that emotional response to stimuli. And that's really what these companies are doing, but they're not they're managing it like an effect, but really they've got to look at this like an affect, because a lot of what we do is, like you said, we go on that smoke break and it's like, now I get to go after this person and harass them, or you know, like I'm going to try to hurt their feelings as hard as I can right now. You know, you're a libtard, you're a snowflake. How many people have been called an idiot in the last 5 years? Like, it's crazy. We can't call people idiots. And look, if I met you face to face, even if I thought you were an idiot, which I don't, I would never go, you're an idiot, right to your face while you're eating your sandwich, because then you might stand up and punch me, deservedly so, in the mouth. You know, I mean, you call someone a coward, that's a contract, because you just said you're a coward, you're a chicken shit. And you're like, all right, well then let me prove to you not, you know, and then you get punched in the face.
Yeah. But again, this is the sort of effect again of being online, is that you know, people don't have to worry. You know, you can call someone a coward, and they're probably not going to come around and punch you in the face because you know, you're anonymous.
Right.
And there are all sorts of studies showing this disintermediation, this way that you're not so worried. You know, if people find there's no consequence for saying things. And so they become more emboldened, and they start to say, you know, ruder and ruder things because, you know, nothing happened. And if that's going to happen, then again, you get a reinforcing cycle. You get a positive feedback, which is, hey, I can be as rude as I like. And that's what leads, as much as anything, to people who you see on Twitter, people who you see on Facebook, and to the same extent, people on YouTube who will sort of do these performative things, trying to get people outraged and, you know, calling people ridiculous names, you know, people in the news or whatever, because they know there's going to be no comeback. It's pretty unusual for anyone to actually get sued over something that they say. I mean, I've seen a handful of lawsuits, libel lawsuits, and, you know, in the UK, the libel law is a lot tougher than the States. And even in the UK, I've only seen a handful of libel lawsuits over things said on Twitter. And when you consider how many tweets there are and how rude people get over Twitter, that's quite something. Yeah,
it is quite something. I know we just bashed all over social media for the last hour, so let's try to end this thing on a positive note. What's something that's good? Like, how have our lives improved since 2010 because of social media? What would you contribute to that part of the conversation?
Well, I think it's enormously easy now to stay in touch with family and with friends, and to rediscover long lost friends. You know, there are stories from all around the world of, you know, people who got in touch with family members who they thought were lost or fallen out of contact with, you know, through Facebook. Twitter for journalists actually is a great resource because it does tell you what things are happening. You can get in touch with people. People who are in, you know, oppressive regimes can use it to get their stories out. So I expect that, you know, depending what happens in Afghanistan, there's probably going to be some sort of use of social media there to tell the truth about what is going on. So yes, you know, they do have benefits. It's that, you know, and it's like, you know, cars have benefits. You know, petrol-powered cars have enormous benefits. You know, they get you from one place to another when you need to get to that place. You know, they get your food to the supermarket. It's just that you have to realize that there can be a downside if they're used in the aggregate. So you think about, okay, so I don't use the petrol-powered car, I use the EV instead. And similarly, you know, with the social media, you think, okay, so I use this positively. So the thing that I choose to retweet is not the person being outraged about, you know, someone being defunded. Instead, it's going to be, you know, this really encouraging video of a rescued dog that has, you know, brought happiness to someone. Because, you know, when you do that, and actually everyone wins. You know, the dog is happy, the person is happy, you're happy, the people who see it is happy. So yeah, it's about recognizing the instincts that you have, and to some extent, you know, finding the positive side of them. And you know, the great thing about social warming is that we really can reverse it, and we can just do it through our own actions. And that's the thing where, you know, compared to global warming, you know, where you need big political action, this one is actually one where the solution lies in our own hands.
I love it. Well, listen, everybody, check out the book. It's called Social Warming: The Dangerous and Polarizing Effects of Social Media. It's on Amazon. It's in a lot of places. It's not hard to find. You guys will find it. It'll be in the show notes as well. And listen, just Charles, in general, I love having these kind of conversations where, well, one, it's a break from the stupid Afghanistan conversation, but two, like there's some reason in the voice of the chaos of social media, because it's really easy. Look, I mean, Mark Zuckerberg has to have armed security around him all the time. That guy has to fear for his life, because people, whatever's worse, what's the worst than despise? Like, he's not just loathsome, like people just have a grinding hate of that guy. And I bet if you met him face to face and you had some lasagna with him, he'd probably buy, and also probably give you a great conversation. You would think differently, So I guess I will close and say, get out of your house, go meet people, and go find out how incredible they can be. Yeah, you're going to get burned from time to time, but the wins are way, way bigger. What are your closing thoughts, Charles?
Well, I mean, it's sort of general things. Be nice to people. expect good stuff from people, and if they disappoint you, then just don't have anything to do with them. And yeah, just be aware of your instincts and try to observe yourself and just try to decide. Don't be at the mercy of your purely animal self. Be your emotional self, but be your kind self.
Charles Arthur, everybody. All right, hang on. Let me shut this thing down.
Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to, curated by yours truly. Thank you so much for watching the Break It Down Show.